So my name's Mike. I've spent the last 15 years or so of my career investigating how humans adapt to high altitude hypoxia. We've done work all over the world. We've studied populations in the Peruvian Andes in South America, performed work in the Sierras in North America, and done a lot of work in where this photo was taken in the Khumbu Valley of Nepal. We've had a particular focus on two things. The first is how much hemoglobin, how many red cells we make in response to our time at altitude, and how the structure and function of the heart adapt. And then how those two things contribute to oxygen delivery and exercise performance. Now, both of those are very critical to the thing that we're here to talk about today, which is, of course, marathon performance. So if we break down our ideal marathon athlete and talk about it, at least from a physiological perspective, we've kind of got three main components or three main pillars. We want our athletes to have really high VO2 max, as Lewis talked about earlier, the ability to consume oxygen at a fantastically high rate. We want them to have a really high anaerobic threshold, so as a percentage of that maximum, so we can make the most of it without suffering from the metabolic consequences of anaerobic metabolism. And we also want them to be really stingy with the oxygen they do consume in turning that into, in this example, into running speed and to pace. And when we think about VO2 max, especially in this population, we are primarily limited by the body's ability to deliver oxygen. And that, again, brings us back to the two factors that we've spent a lot of time studying, which is our total hemoglobin mass on the left there. And just, I guess, a point of clarification, that's the absolute amount in the body that's really important for endurance performance. So that's the hemoglobin we have measured in grams, not when it's expressed as a concentration, as you would normally talk about clinically, certainly anyway. So positive correlation between VO2 max and the amount of hemoglobin we have, and the same relationship on the right-hand side here from André Legersh's work, showing a larger left ventricle correlates with a higher VO2 max, and the same for the right ventricle as well. So our ability to carry oxygen in the blood, in that hemoglobin, and then pump it around the body with a nice big heart that generates a big stroke volume, times that by heart rate, and we get this big cardiac output. Both of those are really important for endurance performance. And athletes have looked for ways to try and improve these. Both will go up with endurance training alone. So athletes will have higher hemoglobin naturally and a larger heart. But athletes will always look for ways to try and improve beyond just training. As Nisham said this morning, some of those are highly illegal. I'm going to focus on the legal side of things today. And altitude has been the mode of choice for a number of decades now. So when we go up to high altitude, the barometric pressure comes down, and that lowers the amount of oxygen that we have in the blood. In response to that, the kidney detects that change in oxygen content, and we release the protein erythropoietin, or EPO. As you can see from the graph, we get a nice big spike in EPO when we first go up. That comes on within the first couple of hours, and then it does tend to tail off after a few days, but remains elevated above baseline for our time at high altitude. And over around 3 to 4 weeks, we get this increased production of red blood cells. They accumulate in the blood, and that's what contributes to us having this extra hemoglobin in terms of grams in the body. Now, the seminal studies in this area that have applied this to an athletic training perspective came from Ben Levine and James Stray Gunderson. They performed a really good study where they had 3 groups. The first, which is the black dots, they performed what's called a live high, train high model. So they spent all of their time living at high altitude, sleeping, eating, and doing all of their training in that environment. The second group, which is the gray dots, did a live high, train low model. So lived, slept, ate at altitude, but importantly came down to do their training so that they could maintain their training intensity and their training quality. So this live high, train low model is probably what's most broadly adopted. And both of these groups were compared to a control group which spent the entirety of their time at low altitude. They had a kind of a lead-in for baseline testing. They performed a sea-level training camp together to try and bring all the athletes up to a similar point, and then they spent 4 weeks at altitude in the altitude groups. And along that, you can see the control group didn't change their VO2 max across their time, but both altitude groups had a significant increase of around 4 or 5 mils in their VO2. and this was accompanied by an increase in hemoglobin mass. So more hemoglobin, more oxygen carrying capacity, and an improvement in performance. Now, based on this evidence and a number of other studies, this has been broadly applied for a number of decades, and altitude training, I think, is an accepted form of training in the endurance world. But in the scientific literature, debate has kind of raged on, and different camps have formed about whether or not altitude training is indeed beneficial for endurance performance. Now, some of the doubt, I guess, has been cast by the fact that when altitude has been applied, or hypoxia, sorry, I should say, has been applied in a placebo-controlled manner, we haven't always seen the benefits that we see on the slide there in front of us. So debate has raged on, and I think there are a number of considerations we need to take into account if we are thinking about doing altitude training with endurance athletes. The first is the potential for maladaptation. So we see things like a decrease in plasma volume and cardiac volumes when we go to altitude. I've already said earlier, those things are important for endurance performance. So we might be adding with one thing, adding some more hemoglobin, but taking away with another element of our physiology. We get sleep disturbances, so majority of people experience central sleep apnea at altitude, so you wake up just feeling not quite as refreshed, and we know how important that is for performance. And we get things like increases in oxidative stress and inflammation, which may impair recovery and influence our injury risk. Not all endurance athletes are flush with cash, don't have budgets similar to Premier League football teams, and so I think the cost, the money that we put into any interventions we do with our athletes needs to be really carefully considered. It takes large amounts of time as well, so typically you'll be away from families and significant others and support, etc., for 4 to 5 weeks at a time. And if you're a UK athlete anyway, even if you set up a tent on the summit of Ben Nevis, it wouldn't be high enough for you to get that hypoxic stimulus. And so altitude training is going to require international travel, and that comes with a carbon cost that we all need to be cognizant of. I think one of the things that has always bothered me about altitude training as well is how we time the return to really benefit from those changes that we've induced. So it takes about 4 or 5 weeks to accumulate those red cells in the blood. Once we come down and that hypoxic stimulus is removed, we've got a window of about 7 to 10 days before those red cells have disappeared. So we get an increased destruction of those red cells as soon as we come down. So it's timing when we use that benefit, whether it's for competition or a period of training intensification, is really difficult, and the adaptations are hard fought but easily lost, as is always the case. And lastly, and I think the thing that bothers me the most, is that we see really significant intra and inter variability in the response. And this isn't the stuff that gets talked about too often, because it's nice. It's much more appealing to have a nice, easy yes-no answer about whether this works. But there are data to show that even if you send the same athlete twice on 2 camps, they won't necessarily respond in the same way. So you can have a really good altitude camp once, you go again 3 months later, and you don't get any real benefit. And there's a fair bit of work going on looking at how we predict inter-individual variability, so working out who in a training group is going to benefit most from this. But a combination of these factors have led practitioners, scientists to think about other possibilities. And the one that I think there's of the legal variety that's getting the most attention at the moment is heat acclimation. So heat acclimation, potentially relevant tomorrow morning, is the process of exposing yourself to heat stress over a number of days in order to induce thermoregulatory and cardiovascular adaptations. So as you can see from the blue line there, almost immediately as soon as we start doing this, we get an increase in plasma volume. That in turn will increase blood volume, increase stroke volume, and the red line there shows that heart rate is falling pretty much in line with that increase in plasma volume. So we get these nice kind of cardiovascular adaptations that we would want to see. We also get a decrease in core temperature and skin temperature. We get an increase in our sweating rate, and those things work together to improve our perception of thermal comfort. So we get robust thermoregulatory adaptations, and those factors all work together to increase our exercise performance in the heat. So that's the really important clarification here at the moment. This is a very established protocol for improving endurance performance in warm environments. It's widely used, and the evidence is really, really clear on that this is an effective intervention if you are planning to perform in the heat. But it hasn't been used in over a longer period of time. So this is an example is 2 weeks, where most of these adaptations are thought to be complete. We haven't looked at it over a longer period to see whether or not we can get adaptations similar to what we see at high altitude. So how would this work? Well, the honest answer is we don't know for sure. We've discussed a number of mechanisms in this recent review we published, and the example or the theory that gets the most attention in the literature is what Sandra Donnelly termed the crit meter theory, and that is that we want to try and keep the hematocrit around about a constant level, so 45% males, maybe 40% in females for endurance athletes. When we start going through heat acclimation, as I said before, we get this big expansion in plasma volume. So we actually get a dilution of the blood. So if you look at the test tube in the middle there, we've now got less red cells, more plasma, so we reduce the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood by essentially creating a dilution. This is a form of hypoxia. The kidney detects this, releases EPO, and over a number of weeks begins to make more red blood cells. So when we get to the test tube on the far right-hand side of the screen, we're back to a normal hematocrit, but our blood volume is just absolutely, in absolute terms, is larger. We might have up to 750 mils, maybe even a litre more blood, because we've got more plasma and more red cells. And the Danes were the first group to try and test out whether or not this might work. So Bent Ronestad and Carsten Lundby, they actually chose to use a protocol of exercising in the heat. So there are a number of different ways we can achieve heat acclimation. They put their group of elite cyclists into an environmental chamber that was set to 38 degrees, and they did an hour's worth of exercise. And pre-post the intervention, you can see there was a significant increase in hemoglobin mass in the heat group and no changes in the controls. But the thing that I guess that bothered us with this was that exercise in the heat will contribute to your overall training stress. So if you think about the preparation you've done for Sunday, but you take 5 of those sessions that you've done each week over the last few months, and you do those in a 38-degree environment, they're going to be a lot more stressful than probably running in 5 degrees and overcast or mild drizzle as it's been training across a British winter. So we're going to increase overall training stress if we move our sessions into the heat. It's going to lower our exercise intensity. So again, if you think back to a particularly hot day, you're probably not going to be able to push yourself as hard as you would do on a cooler day. Heat absolutely reduces our exercise intensity, and will increase things like post-exercise inflammation, which may impair recovery. Now, for cyclists, I don't think this is as big an issue as it is for runners, because overall training volume can be much higher in cyclists because of the fact that they're off feet and the nature of cycling versus running. But if you were to take an elite runner and say they need to move 5 of their sessions into the heat, that's going to have a significant impact on the quality of exercise they can achieve as part of their training. So we asked ourselves, well, can we actually do this on a passive perspective? So can we heat people up using, in this case, hot water immersion, and do so around their training rather than taking over sessions that are part of their normal training? So we approached it with a crossover within subject counterbalance design. So all participants did a control period and the intervention period with a washout between. We had a well-trained group of endurance runners, a couple of whom are in the room today. So a mean VO2 max in the mid-60s. And because it was a within-subject design, we could really carefully match training intensity and volume across the control and the intervention period. We got the guys into the lab where we used 4D echocardiography to assess cardiac volumes before on a separate day doing some performance tests on the treadmill. And the intervention itself was deliberately designed to be super low tech. So we used standard bathtubs that were in one of the changing rooms of our National Indoor Athletics Centre in Cardiff. We would fill the baths up just using the hot water taps. We monitored the temperature using an aquarium thermometer, which was $3.99 off Amazon, no expense spared as part of this study. But the idea is this is translatable because we don't need anything that you won't probably already have in your house. If you've got a bathroom, you've got a bathtub. A hotel room probably has a bathtub in it. So it's portable and easy to use and really, really cheap. We use the same frequency as the Danes paper. So we did 5 days per week, and we did that for 5 weeks. And we measured hemoglobin mass kind of weekly as we went along. So control data on the left in blue and hot water immersion data on the right in the kind of amber yellowy color. No change in hemoglobin across the control period, which is what we expect, other than the kind of individual variation that we get from week to week. But a steady increase in hemoglobin mass in the hot water immersion group, becoming statistically significant at weeks 4 and 5. So this was around a 35 to 40 gram increase in hemoglobin mass, which is what we expect to see at high altitude as well. We also saw an expansion of cardiac volumes, so left ventricular end diastolic volume, just the amount the heart can hold when it's relaxed, went up by 10 mils in our hot water immersion group. That bumped up stroke volume as well. So we saw the cardiovascular adaptations that we hope to see. And we saw an improvement in VO2 max. So no change in the control group in blue, and again, around a 4 to 5 mil increase in VO2, which is very similar to the Ben Levine study that I put up at the beginning. We looked at the contribution of the changes in hemoglobin and cardiac variables as well. 2/3 of the variance was explained by the improvements in hemoglobin mass, but the cardiac expansion was certainly having an effect. And remember, this is something that we just don't get with altitude training. We don't get those cardiovascular adaptations. We just get the hemoglobin adaptations. So passive heating is enough of a stimulus to bring about these adaptations. We've seen an improvement in VO2 max from just adding something to their training, not having to replace their training. It was also administered kind of just at their convenience. So often people would just finish their session. Instead of going and showering and going home straight away, they would just jump in the tub, 45 minutes, and then have their shower and go home. So it's not adding too much to their schedule either. So are we ready for the broad adoption of heat, acclimation? Should we ditch altitude training completely and resign that to a thing of the past? The short answer is probably no. I think this needs to become a tool in the toolbox that we can go to and we can use in the right way, but you don't necessarily need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And some of that comes because this is just quite a tough intervention. So this isn't a relaxing toke in the sub with a glass of wine and a good book. This is 10 minutes of enjoyment, another 10 minutes of I'm getting a bit warm, and then a bit of a struggle towards the end to get through it. So it is tough. In the interest of responsible use of AI, I probably should admit that we have doctored this image. I had to change the digit that this participant was holding up to the camera because it was at the end of a particularly grueling heating session. And I think the other thing we just need to be cognizant of is we're working with human beings. So if we if we offer our athletes the choice between sitting in their bathtub or spending their winters training in Flagstaff, Arizona, or flying to experience some winter sun in South Africa, we know which one they're going to choose. And so we need to be realistic. We need to work within the confines of what we have available to us, but we've certainly got something else now that we can add into the mix. And I think we also need to think about how we could use them together, carefully and strategically, but there are a number of different options. The one that I was kind of most excited about and that came into my head when we started doing this work was whether we can use them sequentially. So if we're going to go and do a great 4-week altitude training camp over in, like say, in Flagstaff, but we're going to come back and we're going to lose those benefits within 7 to 10 days, can we come back and start hot tubbing? So we just did a kind of proof of concept study where we spent a couple of weeks at 3,800 meters in California. We measured hemoglobin mass at the beginning and the end of our altitude stay just to quantify how much we had changed and improved across the altitude portion. And then as we descended, we had a group of around 22, I think it was. We split them in half. Half were a control, the other half were just did the same hot tub protocol for 45 minutes each day, and then we measured hemoglobin mass after that point as well. Both groups saw a similar increase in hemoglobin mass with altitude. So this is what we would expect after around 2 weeks. And it was a pretty severe altitude, as I said, at 3,800 meters. The control group, after 5 days, they'd already lost that. So any of those new red blood cells that had been made were no longer with us, and we are back down to our baseline hemoglobin mass. But our hot water immersion group remained elevated, and in fact, numerically looked like they were continuing to trend up, but there was no significant difference from altitude. So we did passive heating. Bent Ronnestad, the Danes always seem to be one step ahead of us on this one. They had done a similar study, but using their exercise in the heat or heat suit training. You can see their control group on the left, a similar pattern, a rise in hemoglobin from the kind of starting point, the open circles, into the middle data point, and then a fall in the third data point in the control period. And this was after 3.5 weeks, so this is generally what we would expect. But the heat group managed to maintain their hemoglobin, and this was just using 3 heat sessions a week. So somebody asked me this question last night of, could we reduce the frequency once we get into a bit of a maintenance phase? And I think absolutely yes. And I think it would be a lot more tolerable to be doing 2 or 3 hot baths a week versus 5 heat sessions. So it might be that we use altitude camps to get the benefits we want, then we use heat to extend them. And if you think about real-life examples like the Paris Olympics, where you've got actually quite a warm environment in August in Paris, you do your holding camp in St. Moritz, get your altitude benefits, you come back down, and the hot bath protocol is easily accessible. You could carry on doing that in the Olympic Village and maintain those cardiovascular and haematological benefits. And the last thing I just want to talk about is altitude and heat in combination. Now, I think whenever we're throwing multiple things at athletes, we do need to be really cautious. We're getting them to train incredibly hard. We're then giving them time exposed to high altitude, and then we're making them go through heat stress as well. 3 factors together, we could end up with a little bit of overload and burnout. So we do need to be careful. But we've also talked to coaches where they try and apply an overload principle to these environmental stimuli. So we can see the EPO concentration falls with our time at altitude. That says we're making those red cells, and the signal for hypoxia is just getting dampened slightly. But coaches have told us they'll tell their athletes to jump in the cable car sort of in week 2, 3, and 4 of an altitude camp and go and sit up in the summit in St. Moritz, have a coffee, listen to a podcast, try and get a bit more hypoxic dose towards the end of a camp. So it may be there's a place for using these in combination. And again, the Danes have looked at this. This came out a couple of weeks, so I've thrown it into my slides for today. So they did a study in Nordic skiers, and they had 3 groups. The green group performed a moderate altitude training camp, and they did 3 weekly heat training sessions as an addition. The red group in the middle just did the standard altitude camp, and the blue group were a sea level control. And the green group with the combination saw the biggest increases in hemoglobin mass across that period. Okay, so just as a little bit of a wrap up and a summary, high altitude training I think works in my opinion, but we do need just to be cognizant of the potential for maladaptation. We need to balance the costs and the time and everything else that takes away, and have half an eye on the environmental impact of what we're doing as well. Heat training has benefits in that we get additional thermoregulatory and cardiovascular adaptations. It's inexpensive, and although you've got to heat the water, the carbon cost of doing so is very insignificant compared to a transatlantic flight. It needs very minimal equipment. It can be easily integrated without messing with an athlete's training, and we can then potentially use these in combination going forward. I just want to finish with a few thank yous. Whenever I've used the phrase, we did this and we did that during this presentation, it was absolutely the royal we. This is Elliot Jenkins, who's one of the PhD students in my lab, who's done 90% of the heavy lifting on this work. He's done a great job putting together a very challenging set of studies. All of those hot tub sessions were monitored by him. He was there for 100% of them. So he's put in an awful lot of work. The other 10% of the hard work has been from the other guys in the lab who have supported Elliot in the work that he's been doing. And I just want to thank my academic colleagues from Cardiff Met who've helped me support Elliot, and Travis Gibbons, who was helped us with the field studies that we've done. And say thank you.
few minutes of questions for Mike, and then we will move to the round table, so we'll also then start taking questions for everyone as well.
Thank you. A question on your perspective on using dry or steam sauna.
Yeah, so sauna is a good suggestion. We've actually just started doing some studies with infrared saunas. So traditional saunas absolutely will work as long as you're in there for long enough and it's hot enough. Heat acclimation is about getting core temperature up. You should be sweating profusely, big vasodilation of the skin. As long as you're achieving that, it doesn't really matter which way you're getting there. You could do something as simple as just exercising in like your down jacket and a beanie and like some trousers. The thermogenic effects of exercise will generate heat. It won't be comfortable, but it is effective. So however you get there, yeah, absolutely, sauna would work.
Hi, thank you for a really interesting talk. As somebody who's actually tried heat training, your hot tub study had 10 participants, of which one was a woman, and I recognise n equals 1, but did you pull out her data specifically to see if she was any different from the chaps?
I don't think we did because it was an N of 1, but I also don't remember there being a different response. But given it's one person, I really don't know how much we could read into it. We do see hemoglobin increases, at high altitude. I don't think hot water would therefore be any different between the sexes.
Just wondering if you were to run this study again, but not in deepest, darkest Wales. So maybe if you went to Kenya with a population who are already exposed to heat, do you think you'd see similar adaptations?
Good question. So I think in our study where we came down and we had the participants split into a control group and a hot tub group, that was California in July, and it was warm. So the control group was still in a warm environment. They just weren't getting that hammer of a stimulus. And so humans are pretty good at thermoregulating as well. So you have to be in an environment where you can't compensate. The heat you're generating can't be offloaded. So it really has to be to a point where the humidity and the temperature are restricting our ability to offload heat. If people are regularly training in that environment, then I don't think you could get extra benefit. They're probably already heat acclimating. But that's not that common because we are generally pretty good at thermoregulating, as Lewis said earlier.
I have a related question. Recently, Jimmy Gressier broke the 5,000-meter European road record, and prior to that, he did a training block in Potchefstroom, South Africa, which sits at 1,350 meters altitude, and in East it was about 25 degrees Celsius. Now that's neither hot enough nor high enough, in theory, to elicit any sort of training benefit necessarily from the environmental condition. So do you think that there's a potential that the interplay between heat and altitude actually lowers the kind of goalposts for those individually?
Yeah, so did you say 3,050 meters?
1,350 meters.
No, okay. Potentially, although I actually think it might just be that training camps work. So, going and spending 4 weeks or however long they spent there away from the distractions of the real world, that might have been part of it. And teasing out then what's heat, what's hypoxia would be pretty tough. But I would agree with you that neither of those seem high enough or hot enough to bring about what we would expect to see in the kind of physiological adaptations. Oh, sorry, using the mic.
Thinking about overload when you're thinking about programming training, it seems like you get the responses because you're putting a lot of pressure on the body. Is that something you need to consider in your training planning, or do the benefits counteract that?
As in, do you need to alter the training you're doing?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? I think we've tried to design the passive heating so you don't have to do that, because ultimately exercise training works as well. Environmental stresses, I think, should be, an addition, should be added to, not in expense of the exercise that you're doing. But the overload principle is absolutely important that you've highlighted. One thing I didn't say with the baths is we started at 40 degrees and we assessed the perception of thermal comfort and thermal tolerance from the athletes. And then we clamped that over the weeks. So as they actually adapted to the heat and they got better at coping with it, we put the temperature of the bath up, and so that their thermal tolerance stayed the same. Yeah, we're really cruel. So by the end of the 5 weeks, the bath temperature was more like 41.5 degrees. So we're applying that overload principle, which I think is key, whether it's exercise or environmental stress. But I would like to see the two not having to interact, and that's why I think training quality has to be the first priority. And then after that, can we add something that gives us a little extra? All right, thank you very much.